April 11th, 2026, a disgruntled, severely underpaid 29-year-old warehouse worker gloriously sets his employer's warehouse ablaze, deciding he had nothing to lose and going out in a blaze of glory, and giving birth to the now famous line,
"All you had to do was pay us enough to live."
For many of us, this moment marks the beginning of a revolution, but this wasn't the first act of its kind. Over a year before that, another major fire, now known as the Palisades Fire, where a young and disgruntled Uber driver who was inspired by Luigi Mangione allegedly, and this is a very key word here, allegedly lit a massive fire in the affluent neighborhood of the Pacific Palisades, burning through a staggering 37 square miles of this affluent neighborhood and reducing 7,000 homes in the area into a burnt crisp. I say allegedly because even if he did do this, he might actually end up getting away with it because, well, his trial just concluded in a 10-2 not guilty vote in his favor, resulting in a hung jury and a mistrial. And this is going to present serious problems for the prosecution in his next trial. But what if I told you that these two incidents were just the tip of the iceberg? A very small tip of the iceberg. You see, rumors online have been circulating that there have been at least 100 more of these warehouse fire incidents across the United States, and they're just not reporting them because, well, of course they don't want you knowing about it. People are already celebrating and cheering for the literal arson, violence, and destruction of capitalism. And well, if we all knew that this was way more common than we thought, we might just hit a tipping boiling point of no return. Alright, so first off, the usual disclaimer applies here. I'm not here to condone or endorse violence. This video is not about a moral stance or a moral argument. It's about a historical reality. We would all obviously prefer to live in a peaceful, non-violent world, but history, human nature, and well, plain old common sense will tell you that certain conditions must be met in order to ensure peace. And to put it very lightly, these conditions are simply not being met right now. After the slew of well-known and well-publicized warehouse fires garnered a surprising response the media was definitely not expecting, suddenly they went quiet. Radio silence. We haven't heard anything about any fires for quite a while now. Then suddenly, this website popped up, warehousefire.watch, a website which calls itself a crowdsourced industrial incident map. According to this warehouse fire tracker app, a staggering 165 warehouse fire incidents have occurred since that initial Kimberly-Clark warehouse fire, and it's honestly stunning how big some of these have been and how little we've heard of them. There was apparently a $44 million warehouse fire in North Carolina that ended up injuring a firefighter. An athletic club in Portland, Oregon was destroyed by a former employee who, get this, drove a car filled with explosives right into it. And a 51-year-old homeless man was arrested in Washington after burning down 300 feet of train trestle. Now, to be fair, not every one of these fires is an act of violent revolution. Some of these are the usual accidents that just happen. Some are more in a gray area where the fire is under investigation, but it's not quite clear whether or not it's arson. And that's why I actually find this website to be pretty reliable and transparent, because unlike the dishonest mainstream media, they seem to be willing to tell the truth whether or not it fits their narrative. Obviously, whoever made this website wants more people to see all the warehouse arson fires going on, but they're clearly capable of honestly reporting the truth as well when it's just a typical accident. They even have a color-coded system to simplify it all the more. Green meaning a typical accident, yellow and orange meaning under investigation, and red meaning a confirmed revolutionary arson act. You can see exactly where on the map they happen and direct links to articles and sources in the sidebar confirming these incidents. Now, as much as I would like to tell you that this is a totally new phenomenon and that we're experiencing something really unprecedented right now, The reality is it's quite the opposite. Throughout most of the history of the exploitative economic system we live under, known as capitalism, worker violence was actually the norm and not the exception due to how inherently exploitative capitalism is. Hey guys, we noticed something very interesting in the YouTube analytics recently. It appears that the single most important metric for the long-term success of a video isn't actually likes or clicks, it's actually how many people end up subscribing. So, if you found this video important and useful, the best thing you can do to help us get the message out is to simply subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you all so much, guys. We really, truly appreciate it. This article from Vanguard, written by Matt Stone, perfectly breaks this down from an American historical standpoint. Employment negotiations exist as an alternative to violence, not as a favor, not as charity, not because owners discovered kindness. Negotiations exist because the alternative is workers burning everything down, unaliving the people in charge, taking what they need by force. The deal was simple. Pay people enough to live, treat them with basic dignity, give them a fraction of the value they create, and in exchange, they don't come for your head. They don't burn your factory, they don't drag you from your home and tear you to pieces in front of your family. This is the history of labor rights that owners would prefer you forget. For most of American history, violence went in one direction. Owners beat workers, owners shot workers, owners hired Pinkertons to kill strikers, owners called the National Guard to fire on miners, owners blacklisted, fired, and starved anyone who asked for better. 12 to 16-hour days, child labor, company towns where wages were paid in script only usable at the company store, wage theft, no safety, no compensation for injury. When a worker lost an arm in a machine, the owner hired a new worker and paid nothing to the one who lost the arm. When workers asked for better, they were beaten. When they organized, they were shot. When they struck, they were fired and replaced. The violence was one way, owners to workers, always. Then, one day, the violence started going both ways. Haymarket. In 1886, a bomb thrown at police during a labor protest. 8 anarchists arrested, 4 executed. The police had killed strikers. The bomb was the response. Homestead. In 1892, armed strikers fought Pinkertons. The Pinkertons had come to break the strike. The strikers beat them back. Workers unalived, Pinkertons unalived. The violence went both ways. Ludlow, in 1914, the National Guard fired on a tent colony of striking miners, set fire to the tents. Women and children burned alive. 11 children dead. This wasn't a riot, it was a massacre, and it radicalized workers across the country. Owners were assassinated, bombed, shot. Managers were dragged from offices. The violence that had been one-directional before became mutual. The concessions came after and not before. The 8-hour workday came after Haymarket. The weekend came after decades of strikes. Minimum wage came after workers demanded it with force. The New Deal was not benevolence. FDR didn't grant labor rights because he was kind. He granted them because the alternative was revolution. The system was cracking, workers were organizing, communism was rising, the Depression had created mass suffering, and the New Deal was the compromise. Accept capitalism, accept the system, and in exchange you get basic rights, protections, and a wage you can live on. Employment negotiations became the alternative to violence. That was the point. That was always the point. Then employers forgot. Violence was always the alternative. That's what employment negotiations replaced. That's what the New Deal bought. When you break the deal, you don't get to act surprised when the alternative returns. The violence went one direction for most of American history. Owners killed workers, then workers killed owners, then the deal was made. And now the deal is broken. The violence is going both ways again. All you had to do was pay us enough to live. That was the deal. That was the warning. That was the request. Not luxury, not wealth. Enough to survive. You couldn't do that. You wouldn't do that. You chose to break the deal. And now you're finding out what happens when you refuse. I'm going to say something here that might be unpopular with some of you out there watching. I'm actually not a big fan of this type of violence. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely understand why it's happening, but there's a lot of nuance to sift through here. In my opinion, setting an unpredictable, chaotic fire is much different than what Luigi Mangione did. The technically still alleged assassination carried out by Luigi was careful, calculated, and deliberately planned with a specific target. We can debate all day whether his actions were justified or not, and I'm sure we will in the comments, but there's no question that at least he carried it out in a specific, targeted manner to make sure no one else would get hurt as collateral damage. He wasn't a dangerous threat to anyone other than his specific victim, who by all accounts was a horrible human being, a man who made millions in profits by denying thousands of people their health care. Now, did he deserve to be unalived? I'll leave that to you to decide. But clearly the overall circumstances of this are different. Different than setting off a random chaotic fire that can literally kill anyone, even innocent people who just happen to be there at the wrong time. The Palisades fire, for example, killed 12 people in the neighborhood and leveled out 7,000 homes. Now, some of them may have been the rich, evil CEOs we all hate, but some of them may have been totally innocent people, even maybe children who just happened to live there or were in the area at the time. But while I don't support or condone this type of violence, I'm also not dumb and naive enough to think that it just magically somehow won't happen when the overall situation is just this bad. As you just saw, history and common sense obviously tells us otherwise. This is what happens when you create a depraved society and economy lacking all sorts of empathy. We're constantly told by capitalists to hate empathy. We're told how evil and awful it is. We're told that it's so bad, it's literally the end of civilization. We're told to never have empathy for the poor because they're just lazy, even though they're literally working 12 hours a day just to make ends meet right now. We're told to never have empathy for the struggling, the weak, the homeless, because, well, it's just their own fault that they didn't work hard. And here's the problem with all that. Even if I agreed with your premise that empathy is bad and evil, this sort of attitude is exactly what has led to people having absolutely no empathy for you either. This is the monster you created, and now you gotta deal with it. When one of your healthcare CEOs gets assassinated in cold blood, no one has any empathy for you. When your warehouse gets burnt to a crisp in a defiant blaze of glory from an underpaid, disgruntled employee, no one has any empathy for you either. When over 100 copycat incidents subsequently follow, guess what? No one has any empathy for you either. As I said, I'm not a fan of these warehouse fires at all. I think they're quite reckless and not very well thought out like Luigi. But I also know what is the only realistic way to make them stop. Moral grandstanding is not going to make them stop. Good vibes cliches like violence is never the answer isn't going to make them stop. And at this point, even the threat of losing your freedom and going to prison isn't stopping them anymore. People are at an absolute boiling point where they just have nothing to lose anymore. Survival of the fittest is an ideology capitalists love to use to justify the horrific exploitation that goes on within their economic system. To them, it's okay when low-wage workers suffer because, well, this is just what happens in nature, even in the animal kingdom. Only the strong survive. Again, an extremely flawed premise, but even if I were to grant them it, there's one very fatal flaw in their logic that's being violently exposed right now. There is no police state in nature, no bodyguards to protect you, no comfortable gated communities, no private security systems. We invented these systems to protect the wealth of capitalists. We invented these systems specifically to shield capitalist owners from the laws of nature they claim they want to live by. For the most part, these systems do work, but they have a limit. When enough people are pushed beyond the point of no return to where they have nothing to lose anymore, that's when you get assassinations, warehouse fires, and people openly celebrating them instead of condemning them. This has happened throughout the centuries and millennia, and you're incredibly naive if you think you're magically going to be immune to it. As much as violence looks edgy and rebellious sometimes, if we were all being honest, I think we would all prefer to live in a peaceful society. But there are steps we have to take to ensure that happens. And the first one, just start paying people enough to live.